After doing a bunch of videos talking about FSR 3, DLSS 3.5, I noticed a lot of comments. I think a vocal minority. I think a lot of people were very positive about the technologies, excited about the developments, but a lot of the comments were also people upset about these technologies. And I think the general sentiment was something along the lines of, technologies like DLSS and FSR and XESS, these upscaling technologies, have made it easier for game developers to not optimize their games. And I want to respond to that idea because I do see where they're coming from. And I think this also plays into some other topics I've covered on the channel recently. Now let me show you something really cool from today's sponsor, PowerColor, with their Red Devil GPUs with their swappable Devil Skin backplates. It's so cool not have to be locked into just one design. You can choose the one that fits best for you, easily swappable with magnets. We've got the intrusive Devil Skin, which is the kind of the simpler, sleeker looking one, and we've got the mesh design called the generative Devil Skin. These are all really cool. They just attach on with magnets. Excellent choice for a high-end GPU. Check the link in today's description. For example, let's scroll back a bit here. I think this video here, we have Remnant 2 PC performance, Unreal Engine 5, right? We had one of the first big Unreal Engine 5 games, and I did title Upscaling Mandatory in the thumbnail, and that was a response both to what the developers said themselves, which was the game was optimized for upscaling techniques. And when I tested it out, it was very true that one of the best and unfortunately one of the only ways to get significant performance boosts at launch was to kick on some upscaling. And also, when I tested out Unreal Engine 5 again in the Immortals of Avium, which actually used even more of the Unreal Engine 5 feature set, I actually once again found that upscaling was one of the best ways to improve performance. And once again, I think where the real problem comes in is that it was one of the only good ways to boost performance. And I think this is where people's, righteous anger about these technologies might have more validity, as opposed to the technologies being bad in general. So I think to start digging a little bit deeper into what I mean about this, I want us to define more clearly what optimization means, because I think a lot of arguments about things can be avoided because a lot of times, I've noticed people actually agree more than they disagree, but what they don't actually agree on is the definition of a word, okay? So optimization itself doesn't really mean much about a game. If you say a game is optimized, that could mean a lot of different things. And I think the way that word is used sometimes implies that the person saying it, when a person accuses a game of being unoptimized, I think a lot of times they're accusing it of not running well. And while I think a game running at a high frame rate, especially on older hardware or something like that, can be a sign of good optimization, it's not necessarily the only thing optimization means. So to me, optimization is talking about inputs and outputs, right? I'm a math teacher, so that's where I think about this. And you think about, what is the most optimal output I can get for a certain input? And here's the other way I want to think about it, right? So if your axes, if your inputs and outputs, if your output is image quality, right? You want to get the best image quality, and then your input is, what sort of PC hardware compute power is required to reach that level of visual output, if that makes sense, right? So in other words, if one game looks 20% better than another game, and we're going to pretend like you could take something subjective like looks good and assign it a percentage value or a numerical value. But let's say one game looks 20% better than another game, but it runs at half the frame rate, right? So you gained 20% visual quality, but you lost half the frame rate. is that good optimization? I think the answer would be no. But then what complicates this in the PC gaming space is that, and actually consoles are getting even more like this, but to lesser extent with their different, performance scale options, favoring performance versus favoring image quality and all of that. But PC has the most extensive version of this and has forever. Graphic settings menus. And some games expose a lot of graphic setting options in addition to some presets. And then you can also change the resolution of the game, right? You have a lot of freedom on those settings. So for example, another time optimization comes up is when you're talking about, reaching optimized settings for a game, right? So what would be optimized settings for a game? Optimized settings for a game, again, are taking into account that sliding scale of your frame rate versus the image quality, right? And it's a sliding scale. As you adjust certain graphic settings, the image quality changes. But how noticeable is that to you? And I think that's always going to be a subjective thing. And I'm going to come back to that a bit with upscaling, is that image quality and what looks good or not, how much better or worse it looks, can be a subjective personal opinion. And then you slide that, on a scale, right? I'm all about efficiency. Some people wonder, how the heck do I run a YouTube channel and I'm a teacher and I have a family, and no, I don't just entirely ignore my family, and I still manage to sleep at least 4 or 5 hours. Well, that's where something does give. But anyway, where some of that goes is, I look for efficiency in a lot of my life, right? Optimization. If I can put in, 50% of the effort to get 80% of the result, I think that, but you'd have to then double the effort, double the time input to get that last 20%. You have to think about what you're doing and is it really worth that, right? And that's a good sliding scale. So if we're talking about that in terms of game graphics, I think that FSR and DLSS and XESS, these image upscaling techniques, are some of the absolute best game optimization technologies that have ever existed. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that they should be the only game optimization technology that's implemented. But in the history of, PC gaming, one of the best ways, well, not best ways, one of the most impactful ways to gain frames per second, to reduce the load on your GPU, increase performance, is to lower the resolution the game is rendering at. However, before we had technologies like DLSS, once it got to its version 2, and then FSR2, things like XESS, things like that, before we had those, when you just had to literally just turn down the resolution of the game and it just outputs a lower resolution image, and then your monitor maybe does the upscaling, and it often looked quite bad. Like, this was one of the worst ways to increase the performance in your game, just lowering the game resolution. However, with these technologies like DLSS and FSR and XESS, you can lower the whole point is you can lower the internal resolution of the game, which gives you a dramatic increase to frame rate in a game where things are being calculated on a per pixel level, which a lot of technologies are, and I think a lot of Unreal Engine 5 technologies specifically are on a per pixel basis. So when you can then lower the number of pixels you're rendering, and then try to upscale that intelligently, right? That's what these newer upscaling technologies are all about. Is not saying that it doesn't harm the image quality. And I don't agree with the people that, look, it's right there in my thumbnail, DLSS better than native. But again, that was specifically in the case of denoising, older denoisers versus the DLSS 3.5 denoiser. But in general, the upscale, and that's a whole other thing, is these technologies get complicating things that aren't upscaling under the same name brand. But the main technologies behind these is the upscaling, right? So you lower the input resolution, but then you still try to output something that looks close to the original monitor's resolution, and this looks significantly better than the old-fashioned just turn down the game's resolution. And so in that case, from the sense of, boosting frame rate at a small loss to visual quality, I think that in most games, and there's some games with better implementations than others, these are some of the best optimization techniques. And if you were putting together an optimized setting list for a game, oftentimes using DLSS quality would be one of the things that you would want to do. Now, this also gets a little more complicated as we talk about the resolution that you're playing at, because these image reconstruction techniques have an easier job to do the more pixels they have to work with. So if you're playing at 4K resolution, it's often going to look very good and dramatically increase your performance to use upscalers at the quality setting, where you're actually rendering the game at about 1440p, and then these reconstruction techniques are making it look a lot more like a 4K output than a 1440p output. However, not really as good as the native 4K output, right? But you gain a massive amount of frame rate as you do that. Thing is, as you're working at a lower monitor resolution, especially going down to 1080p resolution, you have a lot less pixels to work with, right? So upscaling from, at the quality resolution at 1080 on a 1080p monitor, you're rendering at 720p, and then upscaling from there, and there's less data to work with, so it generally doesn't look quite as good. So in general, I think that as the monitor resolution increases, the effectiveness of these upscalers also increases, and their image quality also increases, and they become one of the best upscaling techniques available. However, that doesn't mean I think they should be the only game optimization available. And this is where I think we're running into problems. When I tested Immortals of Avium, for example, we saw that the difference between running the game at low settings and at ultra settings was not a large change in frame rate. Also not a huge hit to visual quality, although it was noticeable. But this was one of the problems, is if the only way to boost frame rate is these upscalers, I think they're a great addition and possibly even your first choice in the graphics menu when you're looking to improve your frame rate. But if you can't do much else, if going from low to high isn't a massive performance difference, then you're really forcing people to upscale. And that's where we get to these things like upscaling mandatory, right? There's not a large difference between the low settings and the high or ultra settings in terms of frame rate. So then you kind of have to kick in the upscaling. And I'm gonna go, let's try to describe, so what would be a optimal state of optimization for a PC game then? I think that a well-optimized PC game should feature all three major upscaling technologies, because I think that is one of the best ways to optimize performance in a game right now. XeSS, FSR, and DLSS should be included in major AAA releases to give PC gamers their best choice of available upscaling technology to use in that game. And I don't like when they lock certain ones out. Give people all the best choices they can. That would be a big part of optimization for people to get the best result possible. Also, though, there needs to be a wide range of scaling between the lowest settings and the maximum settings. And I actually think that a game running badly at its maximum settings, in terms of frame rate, is not necessarily a sign the game is unoptimized, as long as there are image quality benefits on offer as you increase those settings, and you can peel back those settings, still have the game look fairly good, and dramatically increase frame rate. The game that's popping into my mind right now, probably because it's on my screen right here, is actually, believe it or not, Cyberpunk. Now, compared to the game at launch, I'm talking about the game now, not the game at launch, I actually feel like Cyberpunk is an interesting example of what I would maybe consider one of the best game optimizations. Hear me out, hear me out. This might be a bit of a hot take and it's just popping into my head right now, but here's what I'm thinking. I can get this game, Cyberpunk, to run on low settings, possibly using a bit of upscaling, on integrated graphics. I was recently testing out some little mini PCs, and I could get the game to run well on integrated graphics. And yet, if you turn the game up to its maximum settings, it's been updated to include, the full-on path tracing stuff, which absolutely crushes GPUs, especially again without upscaling, even on a 4090 if you're trying to run at higher resolutions. But if you look at the scalability between the performance of the low graphics settings in Cyberpunk versus the fully path traced mode, and there's all the scalability in between, going from the medium to high to ultra to ray tracing low, ray tracing medium, ray tracing ultra, ray tracing psycho, and full-on path tracing. The amount of steps along that road that all offer noticeable increases to visual quality while the performance drops offers a massive amount of scalability to different hardware with meaningful changes in between. And then on top of that, the game has also been updated to include XeSS, FSR2, and has been announced as being a game that will support FSR3, and it has DLSS 3. And you can do the upscaling mode without the frame generation, and it looks like it will be one to feature this, with the new ray reconstruction even. So I think that is an example that pops into mind as what I think really should be the target as much as possible for PC game optimization. There should be a large number of visual scaling options that go from running on older hardware to challenging the latest and greatest hardware. I don't think it's a bad thing if the latest GPU struggles to run your game, as long as you have some you can peel that back, right? And as long as there's actual visual quality benefits on offer for doing that. And upscaling should be available on top of that. So where I feel like the accusations of, a DLSS and FSR coming in for killing gaming optimization is these games that we're seeing right here coming out recently in Unreal Engine 5, especially with Immortals of Avium and Remnant 2. Now, Remnant 2, I think, has been patched to peel back the high-quality shadows in the options menu, which actually did claw back a big chunk of performance, which was good to see. So there have been some optimization since then, but especially at launch. I think the reason why these are a problem is if you peel back the graphics settings from low to ultra, there's not enough of a performance scalability on offer. And then, therefore, you have to rely on the upscalers. And I don't think it's actually coincidence that these are based on some of the Unreal Engine 5 technology, because as you use things like Nanite to remove the need for developing a bunch of different levels of detail. You can import really high quality meshes, and they scale in and out using Nanite. Maybe you're not creating the lower quality version of the asset to run on lower hardware, right? And so turning down to the low settings doesn't actually give you what we would traditionally think of as low quality graphics, right? Same thing with real-time lighting using Lumen, right? Which was what we're seeing in Immortals of Avium. If you rely on that and you never bake in any kind of lighting, then there is a performance cost for using Lumen, and it can only get turned down so far. And if there's no other lighting technique as part of the game development process, again, I think it's a issue where you can only turn the graphic settings down so far if you've developed the game using these techniques. So that's where I feel like a lot of the stuff we're seeing in Unreal Engine 5 optimizes the game development pipeline to get a good-looking game out quicker. And it will run on, the latest hardware, but it's only going to be so scalable going back to low settings if the game developer doesn't also go back and add in the lower quality versions of all of these assets and spend time doing that. And to be honest, I think this is getting compounded by the fact that we've moved on to a newer console generation. When we were still in the newer stages of the new console generation, there was more reason for game developers to offer those lower quality assets because they were still trying to offer cross-generation support to, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, things like that. So you would make a lower quality version of those assets in general. But with games targeting just the current generation of consoles, the lowest baseline I think they really need to consider from a console development perspective is the Xbox Series S. And so if they can get it, the lowest quality assets, including a lot of upscaling, to run on the Series S, that might be kind of it in terms of their low to ultra scalability, right? In terms of the actual graphics settings. And from there, especially in the console space, they're doing this too. They're relying on these upscaling techniques to then take it the rest of the way. Now, do I think that's a good thing? No. Do I understand from a optimization of developer resources and publisher money, in terms of game development time and money spent? I guess they have to look at, is it worth, not offering support to the older consoles, not running well on older gaming PCs. This limits who you can sell the game to, but it also probably does save them money in their development pipeline, right? So anyway, this video was really kind of a stream of consciousness of me responding to this because I was looking through my comments on these videos and saw all of these questions about optimization and complaints about optimization lately. So yeah, like I said, I think that DLSS and FSR and XeSS are an incredibly good optimization tool. The danger is just making them the only optimization tool in the game. And we are, unfortunately, seeing a bit of that lately. Hopefully, that doesn't continue to be the case in every game, and hopefully we still continue to see some games designed with more scalability from low to ultra. The last thing I'll mention is in the perceived visual quality of games. I think a lot of that can actually come down to the art design as well. Because there's the technical aspect of the game, where I think Unreal Engine 5 games that we've seen so far have actually hit it very well. They are offering a massive amount of geometric detail on screen using things like nanite. But some people saying that they don't look much better than older games. I think a lot of that can also come down to art style. And so I think that maybe the art choices and art style of a game should actually be considered an important part of its optimization process. And maybe more game developers could, and maybe they are. I'm not a game developer. I'm not part of that scene. But I think that's an important thought. How well games age and how well they perform given the perceived visual quality. You can look for strong art design that maybe doesn't require such massive compute power to implement a good rendition of that art style. Anyway, these are my thoughts. I probably can't add in a whole bunch of editing into this video or anything like that because honestly, guys, I have a whole bunch of benchmarking to do. And I'm starting my first week of school with students for the year, so I'm pretty busy on the channel. A huge thank you to everybody. I'll try to still be getting videos out here as I can and running a lot of benchmarks and all that that you guys will see in a while. And I hope all of you have an excellent day.